Thank you for tuning in to Docs and Boxed. Make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to our channel so that more people can get the content that you love. Enjoy! Welcome to episode 2 of Docs and Boxed. So first off, can you introduce yourself with your name, job, and education?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kasia Gora. I am a co-founder and CTO of Sci-Fi Foods, a cultivated meat company, and I have a PhD in biology.
Sounds great. Also just feel free to answer each question to whatever extent you're comfortable with, and you can also decline
Sure.
if you wish.
No problem.
Okay. So first off, can you give us an overview of what exactly your company Sci-Fi Foods is about, like your purposes, goals, and etc.?
Sure. So at Sci-Fi Foods, our goal is to make meat the world can depend on. And really, for us, that's about creating a new sustainable future for agriculture and a way of getting humans the amazing, nutritious meat many of us know and love and enjoy in ways that are much more sustainable for the environment. So we are actually working on making beef using bioreactors. So basically large stainless steel tanks where we grow cells that, it's our burgers are basically made from cows, but not of cows. And so we're not doing conventional agriculture, kind of growing cattle, slaughtering cows, that kind of stuff. And fundamentally for us, this is kind of a twofold issue. One is meeting increasing demand. So as the world population grows and people get more wealthy, they actually want to eat more beef or meat in general, but beef especially. And the way that we currently produce animals can't sustain that. There's just not enough land in order to meet that demand. And then the other issue with animal agriculture, especially with raising cows for meat and dairy, is that it has a huge environmental impact. So a significant fraction of greenhouse emissions come from agriculture, and I think about like 15% total of human greenhouse emissions have to do with animal agriculture, and beef is the worst culprit. And a lot of that has to do with methane. So that's released by ruminants when they eat grass, like cows, and that has a huge impact. It's a really potent greenhouse gas. But there's also tons of land use changes. So like almost the vast majority of Amazon deforestation has to do with the cattle industry. So either land for growing cows or land for crops that feed cows. And so we just think that, we can make beef more efficiently using a cultivated meat approach.
Sounds great. Is there anything like specific that inspired you to start working on this, or was it just like a random idea?
So actually, I started working at Sci-Fi about 3.5 years ago when I met Joshua March, our CEO and co-founder. And so a lot of this really came from Josh. He was inspired by this idea that cultivated meat could be a way to positively transform the agriculture system. And when I met him 3.5 years ago, I really brought in the technical toolkit required to actually do it. So I'm a biologist by training, and I think he's absolutely right. Cultivated meat is a really exciting opportunity, but you also have to have the technology in order to be able to do it at a reasonable price. And so, in terms of background, I have a PhD in biology. I've always worked in biology. I've been a synthetic biologist for about 12 years now. And before joining Sci-Fi, I was an early employee at Zymergen, where I really worked on developing various microbes, so yeast, bacteria, and fungi for fermentation processes. So processes where you create products for humans using various kinds of engineered cells. And so that was a pretty easy pathway from engineering those kind of microbes in order to create useful stuff for humans. And now what I'm working on is engineering animal cells to create food for humans. So very similar vein.
So, has this like always been your goal? Like, were you like working towards this when you were like a child, like younger, or no?
I didn't know. I think the first time I came across sort of cellular agriculture that I can remember was in The Matrix. I was in middle school when The Matrix came out, and I went to go see it with my dad and my brother, and it was like the coolest movie ever at the time. And I think in The Matrix, they feed they're kind of slave humans, the AI overlords, with single cell protein. And so that's kind of an old concept, I believe, from the 50s, this idea that you can basically use microbial biomass to create really nutritious food for humans. And I think in that case, single cell protein is usually yeast extract, that kind of stuff. And so I think that was the first time I heard about that. But in general, I was always interested in biology. I just thought it was a fascinating science. I remember taking my first biology class in middle school and being really intrigued. When I was a kid in elementary school, my mom would leave us home with videos from the library. And so I would watch like David Attenborough's Evolution of Life on Earth. If you haven't seen this, it's great. It's like from the 80s, but it was almost the 80s when I was watching it. So it was more current. And I think it was just like fascinating to listen to sort of a scientific journey through how life evolved on Earth. And it's so interesting and complex, and it's science, and so there's obviously a lot of math involved and a lot of rigorous thought, but it's also biology, so it's really wet and weird and unpredictable and magical too. So I think it's kind of a fun science. I was always interested in that. I got the opportunity to study biology when I was an undergraduate at Caltech, and I did lots of lab work, which was fantastic because that let me experience what it's like to be at the edge of biology and how humans learn more about science by actually doing experiments. And then I continued on to my PhD. I've always loved genetic engineering, so it's kind of fun to be able to modify the genetic code in order to change the behavior of cells. And yeah, I just had kind of right time, right place. And the synthetic biology industry kind of grew up over the last 10, 20 years. And I was coming out of school in that period. And so I just had the opportunity to work on these things. And I think, in terms of like what motivates me, I like solving problems. And so how we're going to feed a growing population sustainably is a really valid and important problem to work on. And so when I met Josh and kind of heard his idea and then really understood that I had a lot of background that was super relevant to solving this problem, it felt like a natural fit. But I would say I personally haven't been dreaming of cultivated meat. Josh has, but I have just always enjoyed using science and technology to solve problems for people, and that's what gets me going. And this is my current challenge, and I can't think of anything more valuable to be working on.
Cool. So can you like walk me through the process of how you guys use genetic engineering to synthesize like edible meat?
Yeah, we don't synthesize edible meat. So it's actually pretty simple. It might sound kind of crazy initially, but we start with a biopsy from a cow.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with a farm in Ohio. Basically, a veterinarian does like a little punch biopsy of the cow using sedation. So those cells, that little biopsy gets shipped to us on ice. And then in our laboratory, we isolate different types of cells from that biopsy. So it's from a muscle, which is like what you would call meat on a cow. So we can isolate cells like myoblasts and fibroblasts and all sorts of cells that you can find in muscle. And we basically take those cell lines and do some small modifications using genetic engineering. And basically the goal is to change some of the behaviors of those cells so that we can grow them in bioreactors. So for instance, animal cells will only grow attached to other cells. And that's actually not a very practical way of scaling up a biomanufacturing process. So I can, like, if you imagine looking at a petri dish and it's full of pink cell culture media, you would see if there was a layer of cells on the bottom, which is how traditionally you grow animal cells in cell culture, you would see it as a haze. So there's so little material there, you can barely see it. And that's really hard to imagine how you're going to create kilograms or tons of product if all you get is like a single monolayer on a plastic surface. It doesn't really scale. So like we've used genetic engineering to convince cells to sort of pop up off that surface and just grow and divide in liquid cell culture media. And now scale up becomes a lot easier because we can just increase the size of our growth vessel and just add more media and we can make more cells. Another example is that animal cells, their growth is controlled by signaling molecules called growth factors. So they're proteins that the animal supplies its cells in order to signal them to grow. turns out those are really expensive to provide in cell culture. So in order to make those outside of an animal, it's super expensive. So we can also use genetic engineering to create cells that don't need those signals, that they're just able to grow without it. So those are some of the examples. But at the end of the day, the reality of what we do is very conservative. So most of what we do is CRISPR-Cas9 to do single base pair insertion deletion. So we'll cut the DNA at a particular place in a gene. The cell will repair itself. It can make a mistake by adding a single base pair or dropping a single base pair. That's enough to disrupt a gene, and it's enough to get a different behavior. And basically, that is the majority of all of the genetic engineering that we do, is making a single base pair edit in a cell to get a new behavior. And it's pretty cool how things can change if you just do that.
So is disrupting the gene like enough for you? Because I remember like when we first talked, you said you guys take advantage of the non-homologous end joining like NHEJ. But like why not use like homology directed repair, like which is more specific with like a DNA template to
Yeah.
get the change that you guys like specifically want?
So you can do that too, but it's actually a lot less efficient than just cutting and non-homologous end joining. Animal cells and mammalian cells specifically aren't very good at homologous recombination. Yeast and bacteria are way, way better at it than animal cells.
Mm.
There's a huge bias towards non-homologous end joining. So you're really fighting that pathway if you want to do anything specific. And so, yeah, I think it's mostly an efficiency issue. Occasionally, we'll add other copies of wild type genes, but we tend to not even use CRISPR for that because the bigger the piece of DNA that you want to insert, the less efficient that homologous recombination is. So that's just like your super technical reason. It just doesn't. It's not very efficient.
Mm. So like disrupting the gene is enough to like get the like mutated protein that you want for the more efficient like growing of the cells.
Yeah, so disrupting a gene is really great for loss of function. So you can just basically block proper translation of that gene. So it's not even made because you've disrupted the frame of the open reading frame, and you can get significant changes in behavior. And that's a pretty decent toolkit.
Sounds good. What are the like advantages that Sci-Fi Foods meat has above like other like more traditional meats?
Well, I mean, I think for us, it's about a new, more sustainable way of producing food. And so that's our major advantage is we're giving consumers, once we get to market, an option where they can have and enjoy the hamburgers that they are accustomed to, but there's no animal cruelty and there's no sustainability issues. And so really that's our value prop, which is like something that tastes amazing and is basically the burger you know and love, but it doesn't have any of those other issues that we have when eating conventional beef.
So would it still like taste the same as normal meat, or would there be like a difference?
It's really close to conventional beef. If you tasted it side by side, our current um prototype, you would notice a difference, but it tastes much more like conventional meat than just a plant-based burger alone. And certainly if you don't taste it side by side, most of the people who taste test it tell us they wouldn't be able to tell. If we served that in a restaurant, they would think that they had gotten a burger.
So you mentioned plant-based meats, like I think there's a company like Beyond Meat or something.
Yeah.
So is that also like more environmentally friendly, or is
Mhm.
like would you say like your guys' method is better for that?
No, I think they're both great. Eating plants instead of cows is way more efficient. And so at Sci-Fi Foods, we do a blended product. So we mix plant proteins with cultivated animal cells, and the impact is very similar. Like it's just much better for the environment to eat that directly than to eat a cow. But one of the challenges for plant-based meat is for folks who are looking to replicate their normal meat eating experience, the flavor is not quite there. And so by blending in cultivated cells, you can actually have a huge impact on flavor and get people kind of to the place where they enjoy and it feels really, comfortable, but also has all those great benefits for the environment and animal welfare.
Cool. Genetic engineering for like it can be used for diseases. Like there's studies going on for like
Um,
sickle cell disease and cancer
yeah.
immunotherapy. So, but those they have to go through like multiple stages, like cellular
Yeah.
studies, animal studies, like clinical trials to be approved by the FDA. So, d does the process look similar for you guys as because you guys applied to food production, or is it like different in any way?
Yeah, so we also need to get FDA approval before we can sell to consumers, as well as USDA approval. So it's the same in the sense that the government oversees cultivated meat as well as cell therapy. I think the bar is much lower for food, and that makes a lot of sense. So when we think about cell therapy, we're actually putting live cells into patients, and you can imagine that there could be a lot of health risk associated with that. And obviously these patients have medical needs, so they're willing to take the risk in order to cure sickle cell anemia or cancer. These are like life-threatening diseases. But it's a little scary putting in cells into an organism and seeing what happens. Food is totally different. So when we think about eating meat, those cells are dead, they're killed, they're not alive, and even if they were, they're animal cells. Like there's no way for them to survive once you chew them and cook them and digest them. And so humans eat a whole bunch of different stuff, and as long as you're not actively ingesting something that's a poison, which all our edible foods aren't, there's really no risk. And especially when you think about how we engineer our cells, we don't add any foreign DNA. So the DNA in those cells is the same DNA that you eat when you eat a cow burger. The proteins are the same proteins you eat when you eat a regular hamburger. And so you can imagine that it's very hard to conceive of a way that this is potentially, dangerous to human health. And in fact, there is no credible argument. You can talk about, cell culture processes and making sure those cells aren't contaminated. And we definitely do that in order to have a successful bioprocess. But there's just not really a credible threat to human health eating cooked cells. And humans have been eating all sorts of weird animal cells for millennia, and we're just fine.
Yeah. So historically, I know people because there's already some like existing GMOs on the market, like for other crops and stuff. So, but people have still been like skeptical of it, even though there's not like evidence that says that it's dangerous for human health. So, do you see it like becoming more popular in the future, like this genetically modified food?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between what people say they worry about and what they do.
Mhm.
And the reality is basically any consumer in the United States that eats processed food, which is most of us, consume GMOs every day. And last time I checked, no one's worried about their Oreo cookie or their Cheetos. They're like, great. They're
Those
not.
actually, like, are those also like genetically modified, like Oreos,
Yeah.
Cheetos?
So, I mean, basically, all the corn in the US and all the soy in the US is genetically modified. And so the reality is like, yeah, you're eating products from GMO crops when you eat any kind of processed food, unless it's organic slash GMO free. But so the reality is, yes, there was a PR issue about GMO crops. It's kind of a complicated issue. I think a lot of the GMO crops that we use today are modified so they can be treated with tons of chemicals to kill pests. And I do think it's a little scary to consume large quantities of random chemicals. And that's something that I'm much more likely to pay attention to. But the DNA itself, the fact that there's a small genetic modification, has no credible, threat to human health and safety. And it's also a way that we've increased agricultural output over the last, 50 years. And it's been part of the toolkit where we can grow more food to feed a growing population, and especially with pressures of climate change. Farming is going to get different, and we need to have, heat and drought tolerant crops in order to continue feeding folks. And the reality is that biotechnology is a safe and effective way to get us there. And, as a techno optimist, I'm here along with my scientist friends, like working every day to, create new technologies that make our lives better. So it's not, just like iPhones and Teslas. We're actually doing technology to improve the food system. And, I think it'd be nice to have everyone chat with their great grandparents or grandparents and talk about the kind of food that we have available today, and how much we take for granted. And depending on where you were in the world just 50 years ago, there was way more food insecurity. You would worry about your kids having enough food. I grew up in communist Poland in the early 80s, and food insecurity was an issue there. My parents told me stories about waiting in line for food. And, today I never have to worry about that. I can just, place my online order at Amazon to Whole Foods, pick it up, get every organic raspberry I want if I want, or whatever the heck it is. And I think that's a lot of that is coming through technology. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And people never get to focus on the amazing aspects of how technology is improving our lives. We like to focus on these like edge cases and fears. But I think the reality is that GMO for food is an amazing technology, and it's going to save a lot of people from food insecurity.
So with other agricultural revolutions in the past, do you ever see like this becoming like the norm, like like a majority of people eating like genetically modified meats and
Yeah.
food?
I mean, we can't continue creating enough protein for everyone the way that we're doing it, growing cows and pigs and chickens. So I think absolutely 100% people are going to be eating alternative sources of protein. I hope it's cultivated meat, because that has a lot of great characteristics that make it a lot more similar to what we eat today than other alternatives. But the food system is going to continue to change, and alt protein is going to become a bigger and bigger part of people's lives. And it already has with the advent of plant-based meat. And, I don't know, this is kind of like an American example, but if you like asked an American 20 or 30 years ago if they had eaten tofu, they would tell you no. And now everyone just like eats tofu, and they don't care. It's fine. It's great.
So your process of like cultivating the meat, I assume it has like a lot of different like lab equipment and stuff that you need to actually like make the meat. So do you think it can ever be like equally accessible to like all parts of the world for like everyone to have equally, or will it be like specific to first world countries like the US?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is complicated manufacturing. Uh, but so R&D often happens in knowledge centers, like California is a great hub of innovation. There's a ton that goes on here in terms of software and new types of businesses, and Apple iPhones, all that kind of stuff, Teslas, that great stuff. But that manufacturing can happen anywhere, and basically the goal is to make meat the world can depend on. So we're here doing R&D, creating cell lines, but we can biomanufacture and set up those facilities anywhere. And local folks anywhere can be trained in order to operate those facilities. So I think innovation, will continue being in sort of knowledge centers, but the reality is that manufacturing can really happen everywhere.
So what went into actually like starting the company and getting funding for like a workspace and lab equipment and stuff?
Yeah. So I got hired and joined after Josh and Co had raised a seed round. And so that's a very small amount of money. I can't remember what their seed round was. I think there was this kind of big. I think it maybe was $8 million. So there's a whole network in Silicon Valley, but in the United States and the world, of venture capital investors. So these are investors looking to invest in companies that might be the next big thing. And so Josh, our CEO, is a serial entrepreneur. He's well connected to various venture capital companies. And so he pitched them this idea. And early on, companies fund ideas. So we got our first little bit of money, which was enough to set up a lab and start working on proof of concept. And over time, we've built a synthetic biology platform for engineering mammalian cells. We've created the world's first beef suspension cell line, so beef cells that we grow in bioreactors. And so we're doing a ton of R&D to show progress, and that's how we continue to raise investment in order to be able to do this work.
Sounds great. I think that's all I have for today. Do you have like any like closing thoughts you want to share with the audience, or?
Do I have closing thoughts to share with the audience? No, this was a fun interview. I'm happy to chat. And yeah, I think, the world is a wonderful place, and technology is doing great things. And I've been super lucky to be able to have a great education, but also a career in STEM, which is like the most fun job I can ever think of. It's not really even a job. It's just more of a way of life. So I think, folks in your audience who are passionate about science and technology, I think there is a great way to have a wonderful life pursuing those things and using science and technology to help people. So I'm definitely would encourage folks with a passion to follow that and go through school and be able to do these jobs.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time and have a
Yeah,
great
you're
day.
welcome. Okay, you two have a great day. Cheers.
Bye.